Okay, so now that we have these new pages set up, let's go ahead and make use of sessions by integrating the express session package. So to do this, I'm going to go ahead and open up our terminal window, and I'm going to open up a new tab, and I'm going to be installing a package using yarn. And I'm going to say yarn add express-session. So basically what this package is going to allow us to do is it's going to allow us to make use of sessions on our backend. It's also going to return to the user a cookie if we tell it to do so. So now that we have this downloaded, let's go head on over to app.js. And let's go ahead and pull it in. We're going to create a new section specifically for our authentication packages. So let's go ahead and make a comment that says this section is going to be for all of our authentication packages. And here we are going to be saying, create a variable called session. And this is going to be equal to, we're going to be pulling in the package that we just downloaded, which is called express-session. Okay, so now that we're pulling this package in, now we need to actually integrate this within our app by adding it to an app.use method. So the code that we need to do this is going to be available within the express session Git repo. So let's go ahead and head on over there. And I'll full screen this for you guys. Let's click inside express session, and if we scroll down eventually, you'll see this is where we're at right now. We just required a session and stored it in a variable called session. Where we're at right now is we need to integrate a small snippet of code, and the snippet of code is going to be, looks like this right here, this app use function. So what we're going to do is we're going to copy this, and we're going to head back on over to our app. And let's see, I think you actually have to require this right below a specific package. Let's go ahead and require it beneath all of our other use middleware. So we're going to require it right beneath our static function middleware. I think it has to be beneath the cookie parser package, if I'm correct. But anyways, we're going to paste this snippet of code right beneath our static file middleware. And once we do that, let's go ahead and comment out this secure cookie right now. If you have HTTPS, you're going to want to make sure that this is enabled to true. Once we save this and refresh our app over here, we should see a cookie being listed out now that we installed and initialized our express session package. So let's go ahead and look within our application. And let's go ahead and refresh the page and click on our cookies. And I want to make sure that this isn't from a previous test. So I'm going to delete the cookies in here and refresh the page again. And now if I click on this cookie right here, you'll see that we have a cookie created for us automatically. And this connect.sid, this is referencing the session that we have going for us within the backend of our app. So right now, using this use statement, express session has created a session for our visiting user on our backend, and it has also returned to the user a session ID, which once we integrate Passport, the user will be able to use its cookie and its value in order to access data specific to their session. So let's go head on over to the use function right here where we're integrating our session, and let's cover the properties that we have going on here. So this secret, you can kind of think of this as a salt from the last episode. Basically, each time we return a cookie to the user, it's going to be signed with a secret, and you can kind of think of that as what we're using to hash our cookie. So this should always be a random string of characters because we want to make sure that no one has access to this. So usually you'd use a random string character generator to actually generate the string. I'm just going to go ahead and input a random string of characters for time's sake. This resave property, this determines whether or not our session should be updated even though a user may not have made a change to the session specifically. So each time the page is reloaded, essentially we would go ahead and resave and re-update our session even if no changes were made to the data on the back end. So we're going to keep this at false so that we're only saving our session whenever a change is directly made to it, and save uninitialized. This is going to create a cookie for us and a session for us whenever a user visits the page, even if they have not logged in. So we want to make sure that we set this to false because we want to make sure that we're not taking up any unneeded storage space on our server. We want to make sure that we're only creating cookies and sessions for whichever users have logged into our app, because that's what we're going to be using to determine whether or not a user is currently logged in. So we're going to save this to false. And if we delete the cookies in here right now and refresh the page and visit our cookie again, you're going to see that we're now missing that cookie that was associated with our express session package. So this cookie is going to be created again, but only once we integrate Passport.js and we log our user into the backend. So we have a session on our backend, and we have, or at least we had, cookies being returned to us on our front end. But how do we actually log a user in and tell our app that a user is logged in, that they should have access to only their specific data? Well, this is where Passport.js comes in. Passport.js is an authentication package that'll go ahead and test the user's username and password in the backend of our database, or maybe even another database such as Facebook or Google's database. It'll allow for multiple authentication methods. And if a user has successfully authenticated, it'll go ahead and create a session for us and return the user a cookie. And the session is specific to whichever user has logged in, so no other user should be able to access this session or the information associated with the session. So I think I've mentioned this before. Basically, the cookie that we're going to be creating with Passport.js, it's going to act as a key to our user's backend session. And within this session is going to be a user ID, which we'll use to grab other user data, such as the user's username and the user's email and so forth. So that is going to be the next step. We have our sessions and our cookies ready to go, but we now need to integrate it with Passport.js so we can make use of Passport's authentication functions as well, such as login and logout. So to make use of Passport.js, we're going to head on over to our terminal again, and we're going to be adding a package called Passport. Simple enough. And once we have Passport installed, we need to require it within app.js. So at the top near our authentication packages, we're going to say var passport is equal to require passport, and that's going to pull the package in, store it within a passport variable. And now we need to actually initialize this. So same thing like we did for express session package. We are going to head on over to the Passport documentation. So we'll say Passport.js get, and we'll open this up to full screen. Click on the first result, and let's see how we can integrate this within our app. So we just did this, we just added the package, but now we need to actually initialize this. So let's keep on scrolling. Let's see. Okay, this is where the initialization stuff comes in handy. So you'll see these last two lines of code. We're going to be copying these, and you'll see that they're already making use of express session right above it. We're going to be copying these two lines of code, heading back on over to our app, and right beneath our express session middleware, it has to be right beneath it, we're going to paste these two lines of code. And basically what this is going to do is it's going to initialize Passport, which will allow us to make use of different authentication strategies. It's also going to make sure that Passport can integrate with express session, which it'll need so we can test whether or not our user is logged in using the session. So once these two lines of code are in place, we're going to go head on over to index.js where our routes are. And now we need to focus on this function right here where we're hashing our password. So this right here will go ahead and store our user and their hash password in the database. But what we want to do is we want to take the user that we just created and we want to log them into our app. We want to create a session and authentication cookie and update that session telling it that our user is currently logged in. And as a result, we're going to be able to do things such as access restricted pages and pull data specific to each user. So within here, the first thing we need to do is we need to make another query to our database that gets the user that we just inserted into here. We want to make sure that we're only logging in the user that we just created using a register form. So let's go ahead and full screen this. And to make another query, we're going to say db.query. And typically, since we're getting kind of far in here indentation-wise with Node.js and async programming, you would want to use promises to kind of make sure that things aren't getting so indented. But for time's sake, we're just going to go ahead and make a typical async call like so. So within this query, we want to select the last insert ID. This is going to get the ID that we just inserted into our database. And we want to grab this as user ID. Okay. And so now that we're querying this, we need to have a callback function. And this is going to have an error. It's going to have results, and it's going to have fields as well. Now we need to actually create the function contents right here. And we're going to move this res.render inside of this query. So since we are calling this query right here, as a result, within this results object, we should be getting the ID associated with the user we just inserted into our database. So first thing first, if we receive an error, we are going to throw an error, just like we did up here. But if we do not receive an error, if we successfully grab the user's ID, what we're going to do is we are going to take our request object and we are going to log in our user. And this login function is going to come directly from Passport.js. So logging our user in, it's going to create a session for the user and it's going to update it with whatever information we pass through to it. So we want to make sure that we're passing through our user's ID because that's what we're going to use to retrieve other information pertaining to our user later on. So to pass through our user's ID, well, we already know that we're grabbing our user's ID by running this query right here, and it should be available within our results field. So we're going to take our results and select the first object available within here. And let's go ahead and console log this out just to make sure that we're actually getting the user's ID. We're going to take the user's ID and store it within our session as soon as we call this login function. So like I said, this login function will create a session and a cookie for our user. We also need a callback function to say what should happen if the login was successful. So if the login was successful, we're not going to render register. We're actually going to take our response object and we're going to redirect the user to our root. So this is going to redirect the user to our home page if we were able to successfully log the user in. So this request.login function, this is only going to work if we have another function set up for session specifically. Basically, we need another function that'll go ahead and take what we're passing through this login function. It's going to take this user ID and it's going to store it directly within the session that we're creating. So if we go ahead and look at the documentation over here and we scroll a little bit upwards, let me go ahead and full screen this for you guys. If we scroll a little bit upwards, you're going to see a section for sessions. And basically this comes with two functions that we're going to need in order to make Passport.js work. So as you can see, this section says Passport will maintain persistent login sessions, but in order for this to work, the authenticated user must be serialized to the session and deserialize when subsequent requests are made. So serialize to a session, that's basically writing whatever user data we want to write to the user's session. And then deserialize user, this is just obtaining whatever data we want to retrieve from the user's session. So this is writing the session, this is retrieving from the user's session. So we need to make sure that we have both of these functions integrated within our app. So we're going to be copying these and pasting them at the bottom of our page, because this is where the deserialization and the serialization is going to take place since we're logging the user in right here. So if we go ahead and paste these in and save this, we can go ahead and get rid of this function right here that's unneeded since that comes with Mongo. Let me go ahead and show you the process really quickly. So as soon as we call login right here, we're passing through our user's ID. And let's go ahead and make this a little more apparent using a variable. Let's go ahead and create a constant. This is going to be equal to user ID, like so. And this is going to be equal to results 0. That should get the user's ID. And we're going to be logging the user in with user ID. So what this is doing is we're taking the user's ID, we're passing it through this login function. This login function in returns writes data to the session using the serialize user function. So basically user ID is being passed through right here. So let's go ahead and replace user with user ID. We can get rid of this ID right here. And then deserialize user is also taking this right here, this user ID, and passing it through as a result. So each time we actually want to store our user's ID in the session, we're going to be calling this function. And each time we want to read from the session, we're going to be calling this function as a result. So the process is we go here, to here, to here, to here, to here. And that's basically how we're going to be able to access our user's session data throughout the majority of our app. Each time we go to a different page, we're going to be calling deserialize user because we want to make sure that we're obtaining our user's ID and so forth. So once we have all of this in place, let's go ahead and make sure that this console log function works right here. And let's go ahead and also make sure that the serialize user function works. So in order to test this out, we're going to head back on over to our app, our registration page. We'll exit out of this. You'll see that we didn't have a cookie in place at the time. But if we go ahead and create a new user, let's see what happens. All right, so it looks like we're getting some kind of error in our console. Let's go ahead and check out node.mod really quickly. And you'll see passport is not defined. Okay, so since we're making use of passport serialize user and passport deserialize user in this app, and we're also making use of this login function, we need to make sure that we're also requiring passport in this index.js file. So head on over to app.js, copy passport from here, and go ahead and paste it within index.js right beneath, let's just do it right beneath express validator. So if we save that, and let's see, okay, our app is restarted. Let's go ahead and refresh the page and try to submit another user really quickly. So if this is successful, we should see a cookie in our browser. We should also see, what is it? We should see our user's ID in the console, and we should also be redirected to the root of our site. So let's see if we are successful here. Okay, so not quite, we're almost there. So you'll see on line 70, we have an issue. Let's go ahead and look at line 70. Line 70, okay, we're making use of an error variable that does not exist. This was from the example code. Go ahead and set this equal to null for the time being. And if we save that and refresh the page, Let's see if we were successfully logged in. Let's see if we have a cookie available for us. Let's see application. Okay, so we do have a cookie available for us, which means that we have successfully logged in. Let's go ahead and look within our terminal, see if we're getting a user ID, which we are. We're now getting a user ID of 40. So this is representing our user session right here, is this user ID of 40. But to actually see what's inside of our session, completely all the data associated with what's going on in the backend, we can go ahead and console log out a few more things. So what we're going to console log out are the following 2 lines of code whenever we make a GET request to our homepage. So if we go within index.js, right where we're making our GET request to our homepage right here, we're going to console log out these 2 lines of code. So we're going to be console logging out our user associated with the session, and we're also going to be console logging out whether or not the user is authenticated. So basically, these 2 things come with Passport once we integrate it within our app. So if we did not have Passport, neither of these would be readable. But now that we have Passport integrated, we can test whether or not data is actually being passed through to them. So if we save this and refresh our page over here, you'll see if we look inside our cookie, we have our cookie ID. But if we look within our app, you're going to see this right here. And we're getting a user of undefined, and we're also getting a request is authenticated of false, which means our user is not authenticated. We don't actually have a session running in the backend specific for this user that just logged in. And why is that, even though we just had it running? Well, the issue is whenever we make a change to one of our backend files over here, we're restarting our app using nodemon. And since sessions are volatile, they're non-permanent, each time we restart our app, well, we're basically clearing all of our sessions over and over again each time we restart it, which is not really what we want for development purposes. Since we're clearing all of our sessions over and over again, well, each time we clear a session, we have to log in or register from the very beginning, which is just going to be time consuming and annoying. So let's just go ahead and register one more time with another account, and I'll show you what the backend data should look like with is authenticated and user. And then we're going to implement something called session storage, which will allow you to have persistent sessions each time your app is restarted. So let's insert some dummy data right here. QWERTY1 for everything. I did not mean to save that. QWERTY1 for everything. And I failed on the username, it looks like. Let's go ahead and try this one more time. QWERTY1. Excuse -lane doing that little password is weak thing. Okay, so now if we look in our terminal, you'll see that we're getting our user, which has a user ID of 41. So the reason we're seeing this user ID right here is because we specified we should write the user's ID to the user session using serialize user, and we're retrieving it by deserializing the user with this function right here. And then we are authenticated because we logged in using Passport, and Passport's going to take care of all this authentication stuff for you, which is really nice. After we integrate persistent sessions using a session store, what we can do is we can restrict access to each of these routes using this is authenticated method, which I'm going to be showing you in the next episode. But first things first, we want to make sure that we're implementing a session store so that each time we make a change to one of our backend files over here and nodemon restarts, we're not clearing our session completely, so we have to register all over again. So that's what we're going to be covering in the next episode, and then I'm going to be showing you guys how to restrict access to certain pages, and then we'll go ahead and pull data in specific to this user that we just authenticated using Passport.js and Express Session. So I hope you guys enjoyed, learned a little bit more about sessions and Passport.js, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.